Good morning to our listening audience. This morning we have Caroline Burkholder speaking with us as our guest speaker. She is the Pennsylvania State Director for Defend Our Future, previously mentioned by Matt Wang in our previous segment. And the Defend Our Future is a project of the Environmental Defense Fund, which is a national group interested in conserving and preserving our natural resources. Welcome to the program, Caroline. Tell us about Defend Our Future and some of your activities.
Of course. So as you mentioned, we are a project of the Environmental Defense Fund, which is one of the older environmental nonprofits that's been in the game kind of since the creation of the EPA.
Mm-hmm.
And what the EDF is really focused on is solving the most critical environmental problems that we're facing now. They work in concert with for-profit institutions with basically an underpinning of science and economic research that really guides practical solutions to problems. And what Defend Our Future is we are the youth engagement and grassroots organizing project of the Environmental Defense Fund. So we work directly with college students. Actually, we're focused on this millennial population, knowing that, we really found it out of the growing evidence that millennials by and large believe that climate change is real, and that is it's an overwhelming majority. Actually, it's almost like 85% of millennials believe that climate change is real, but they don't vote in those proportions. And and we're trying to see if we can use this issue of climate to kind of instigate civic participation and civic engagement, either by voting or by kind of demanding the shift to clean energy.
Sure.
And saving our planet.
Well, the millennials are the largest living generation, and they certainly are going to be in positions of responsibility and accountability as we go forward more and more.
Absolutely.
So their involvement and their awareness of the scientific facts of all these issues that we're trying to bring out here on this program is very germane to public health.
Yes.
And the loss of our natural resources, which we can't afford to do because nobody can recreate them. Well, so then, if I understand correctly, the Environmental Defense Fund uses as its platform the 1972 U.S. Clean Water Act, the U.S. Clean Air Act of 1970, and the more recent Toxic Substances Control Act of 2016 as a platform, a skeleton for the activities that you engage in.
Right.
And in particular, I understand that the Philadelphia and Reading and Camden, New Jersey areas rank as one of the 25 most polluted areas in the country for ozone, year-round particulate pollution caused by incomplete combustion processes in power plants, cars, trucks, and heavy vehicles, as well as home and commercial building furnaces still employing natural gas and the number 2 petroleum oil as their fuel source. So Pennsylvania is very much a part of the older paradigm that is giving rise to increased cases of asthma, COPD, lung cancer.
Yes.
And one of the things that we're going to be talking about in an upcoming segment is the radon release. When these fuels are, when these natural resources are removed from their rock or their shale, it also releases by natural law radon, which a lot of people are not aware of. But we're going to be talking to some experts on that as well. These are all cancer-causing agents, and we want the public to be aware of the impact, not only on global warming, but public health issues and climate change when they employ these oil and gas, older technologies. So, Caroline, tell us how the EPA usually works with our regional, that's the environmental
Protection Agency.
the
Yes.
protection agency, to ensure that our residents receive the benefit of the best environmental protection and cleanup science and technology, as well as legal protection, to go after the polluters, to make them accountable. I know you have some knowledge of this.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned kind of the two major acts, and obviously the EPA has been hard at work for many decades, but really the skeleton of it, as you alluded to, is the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act.
Mm-hmm.
And really, what we're trying to do is support the EPA and protect the precious funds that they do have. So you mentioned some of what the specific problems that occur in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is the third most challenging place to live in the most challenging place to live in with asthma in the United States. And you mentioned it's one of the 25 most polluted areas. And what the EPA does is it works in tandem with local and state governments to award large sums of money. Now, overall, the Pennsylvania has received more than $225 million in grants. In terms of the air pollution issue that you alluded to, these grants cover about 30% of Pennsylvania's state and local air quality monitoring costs. So that's 39 million,
Mm-hmm.
9 million just in Philadelphia alone. And that's
Right.
actually the third most air monitoring grants out of any of the states in the United States. So we're getting a lot of money. And it's not just those pollution and monitoring and control costs. It's also money, competitive science grants that are going to engineering students at
Surely.
institutions,
Surely.
even here in our region of
Surely.
Villanova and Temple,
Surely. Uh-huh.
Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon. They're all receiving what are called STAR grants, the Science
Surely.
to Achieve Results. And so this money, not only does it go into the actual technology, it also goes to invest in some of the brightest young minds that are developing
Mm-hmm.
solutions to these problems.
Surely.
So we're really divesting from young people, from the millennials, and from practical and exciting new solutions that are being offered up at institutions in the region. And there's even more grants too that go to, they're almost like micro grants, like $300,000 to Pennsylvania for environmental justice grants that are quite small, but they're going to individual municipalities. They could be going to townships, but you really don't realize how much the federal dollars do make their ways into our backyards here in Philadelphia and across the state.
But now with the new budget from the federal from Congress, I understand that we probably will be losing some of the funding. Do you want to speak to that?
Right. So there were several iterations of the budget throughout the course of the fall. The most draconian cuts, we're looking at almost a third of all of the EPA being eliminated. And this means a 30% cut to those air pollution control grants I alluded to. This isn't the entirety of the funding for all of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup. We're talking the elimination of the Office of Environmental Justice. And that total amount of money could be as much as $3 billion. The latest figure that we have coming out of the Senate in the itemized proposal with the writers was $150 million, which the total budget for the EPA is $8 billion. So even that is really a drastic cut. And I think what's important to keep in mind here is that it already is at its lowest funding levels in decades. So adjusted for inflation, the EPA is less funded now than it was when it was created by a Republican president in the early 1970s.
And they still have a lot of work to do, not only with the brown fields, but also the Superfund sites that really need to be addressed.
Absolutely. We have the third most in the country for Superfund sites and for brownfields. So 5 out of the 95 Superfund toxic waste sites are in Philadelphia. And I believe it's about 200 or over 200, almost 300 of the brownfield sites, of the 800 brownfield sites in the country are, 800 in the state are actually in Philadelphia. So that's 290 of Pennsylvania's 800 brownfield sites are in Pennsylvania. And these, I think you did allude to this. These are really an issue of justice. These disproportionately affect low income communities of color, and what a lack of funding in these programs really represents is an unwillingness to invest in these communities when we do the cleanup. So, for example, there's a study analyzing data from near 48 of these sites, and it showed an increase of tax revenue from 29 million to 97 million, and that was just in 1 year. And that's the 50 sites. And really what you're seeing is $16 returned from $1 invested in the cleanups, and it also has huge impact on job creation too. You're seeing 8.5 jobs per $100,000 spent. So really it's a 2 to 7 time return on investment for the EPA.
Plus the quality of life of the people
Of course,
in the general area. I mean, you have many seniors who have been on Social Security and very limited budgets for a long time, more than 20 years, and their quality of life, because they're in these areas, is not what it should be.
Absolutely. And you're seeing a lot of people with asthma here in Pennsylvania. And so you mentioned COPD. I think that's one that people don't realize is how much the code red days, the days with the high particulate matter, affect people's ability to go outside and function when they have, these existing illnesses.
And
the
then
pollution
they have to
really
take
exacerbates it.
Time off from work. I mean, it's lost
There's
days.
thousands of lost school days for kids, and I don't know if you've ever been with a child that's had an asthma attack. It's really,
I was just yes,
it's a terrifying experience, and it's something that no kid should have to go through, especially.
And the parents of the children who have to stand there and watch the child go through this. It's a very frightening experience not to be able to catch your breath.
Absolutely, and I mean, and not to mention, I mean, I hate to make it about the money, but when you're also looking at $2.3 billion price tag for the healthcare associated with asthma, when it could be avoided.
Sure, and the public health risks are undoubtedly the most important part of preserving our clean water, clean air, and non-toxic soil. I mean, our crops come out of this soil. The animals we use as our food source graze on this, the grasses and plants. So it all has an impact on our quality of life, but our public health.
Absolutely.
Is also of paramount importance when we discuss the pollution points and cleaning them up. So, can you tell us what you have been doing here at the Drexel campus in the last year or last years to make the students, especially the millennials, more aware of these toxic sites?
Absolutely. I should clarify too that we have really become focused on the EPA after the most recent election in 2016. Kind of big picture, EDF and Defender Future would like to see a comprehensive cap and trade carbon tax is really what our ultimate legislative goal was. But in looking at kind of the new cast of characters taking up the helm at the EPA, we really initially started having conversations, and really what the bulk of our work is community organizing. So these are individual conversations face to face with our peers talking about these issues. So we did an action around looking to have the Senate vote down the confirmation of Scott Pruitt, which we were not successful. We've done a little bit of organizing around the garnering more support for the Paris Climate Agreement and asking our local federal politicians to pledge or come out against the president's decision to take us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. But in terms of the EPA, we've really been talking about these budget cuts since they were announced in March, and this is individual conversations again with folks, and we're asking them to call their federal representatives to ask them to go to bat for them to defend these dollars and protect their health and the lands that they love. I think something that's been really interesting to see on campus is to kind of test people's awareness. We have a trivia wheel that's really popular, and we have some questions about the EPA. And one of the questions is, what percentage of the federal budget goes to the environmental protection? And when you just have that open-ended question and people have to guess, we're hearing people say, 40% sometimes, maybe even 15 or 10, not knowing that it's less than 0.25% of the total federal budget goes to the Environmental Protection Agency. And when you talk to folks who truly believe that climate change is the defining issue of our generation, how could that be that all of our energy and protecting the very few resources we have left is really just a blip on the radar, and it's not represented fiscally the priority that many of the United States young citizens really feel that it should be.
Surely. Well, hopefully this program will get the scientific facts to the general listening audience, and people will get involved because they become concerned when they get the facts.
Absolutely. It's all about elevating dialogue, just like with the show.
Well, Caroline, we understand that there are critical safe drinking point sources that would be very much negatively impacted by such budget cuts. Could you expound on that a little and give us some more information on where these point sources are, the types, just generically, the types of point sources?
So there's a couple different programs. The non-point source pollution program, which I think is the one that you're alluding to, Pennsylvania received $23 million in grants in the last 5 years, and that helps Pennsylvania, and this is typically through the DEP, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, control pollutants from rainfall runoff and from ending up in the water sources. So this is where you're talking about runoff with, it could be animal feces or other toxic pollutants.
Insecticides, pesticides.
Right, exactly. And that really is, that type of pollution is the leading cause for water quality problems in the United States. When you speak more about public water system supervision, that's a lot more money, but it also looks different depending on where you're located. So here in Philadelphia, we obviously have an urban watershed, and we have a very kind of pioneering program that the EPA is contributing heavily to, and it was kind of a landmark, Green City Clean Waters, and that's a really sophisticated storm runoff management, which does involve some combined sewage, but those water pollution control grants and the public water system supervision totaled over $50 million in grants for the last 4 years. So that helps states and water systems control and prevent harmful pollutants from entering the water systems rather than the water sources, which is the runoff and an issue of the source. Something that's I think really important to mention when we talk about Pennsylvania is the elimination of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup program. And what's unique about that is it's all of its headwaters come straight from the Susquehanna River Valley, which is, if you know anything about Pennsylvania, that is a very fertile farming territory, and a lot of the money that comes from the grant for the cleanup is actually money used to educate farmers in the Susquehanna River Valley about what their fertilizers are doing downstream. And then, of course, when you kind of follow the water down to Maryland, you're looking at the largest estuary in North America that needs protection. There's vital ecosystems that need to be protected, but also there's food sources. Exactly, food sources, and also it's a very popular recreation destination. That is a very popular sailing destination, and a lot of water activities, and what we're looking at is many sources, but Pennsylvania actually receives a great deal of the money that is going towards Chesapeake Bay cleanup. So it's important to remember that these dollars, the water doesn't really respect state borders here, and even though we might not associate the Chesapeake Bay cleanup with Pennsylvania, it's one of the hardest hitting cuts, and that was initially, and I think it will receive a significant cut. It received $34.5 million over the course of the last 4 years, and mostly looking at agricultural runoff, but it was proposed to be cut completely from the original budget proposal. So hopefully we can stave off some of it, but we are looking at serious potential water pollution?
Well, I understand that approximately 8.2 million Pennsylvanians rely on surface waters such as headwater, rain fed, and seasonal streams for their drinking water, not to mention the precious aquifers just below the crust of the earth. And so the runoff of pesticides and insecticides and other chemicals and fluids containing harmful cancer-causing agents pose a very serious health risk to the state's residents who do rely on the safe drinking water from these natural rainfalls into the rivers, streams, and lakes. Caroline, the EPA funds also help to educate the state's farmers, as you had mentioned, as to the harmful effects of various chemicals used in the traditional farming practices. And hopefully, in a number of segments beyond this, we're going to be talking to people more knowledgeable about organic farming products. As we try to change through science the old paradigm, moving into a newer paradigm that is more respectful of the public health and quality of life issues. So the funding, of course, has a big impact on the EPA, their ability to hold accountable and bring them to justice, these polluters, especially the large industrial process and manufacturing plants. I mean, these are huge concerns, industrial concerns, and the runoff and just plain pollutants into our streams and lakes, etc. Release a lot of these very harmful PCBs and CFCs that are, we know, they are known cancer-causing agents. There's another area of concern in maintaining public health in the state, which also adversely affects clean air and clean water resources, and that's the issue of clean, unpolluted soil in which our livestock graze and in which we grow our food, our fruits, vegetables, etc. So in addition to the Superfund and brownfield sites, these areas include the underground chemical storage tanks and hydraulic fracking or fracturing, commonly known as fracking, for natural gas and petroleum drilling. And of course, all these point sources release cancer-causing heavy metals, in addition to the radon, which is released during the mining process. And other chemicals, many other chemicals, a whole array of other harmful chemicals that create these chronic allergies and serious illnesses, and in some cases, untimely deaths. People have heart attacks as a result of not being able to breathe or having an asthma attack. So these are very serious issues that hopefully by bringing out these facts to the general public, especially our listening audience, our listeners could become proactive in contacting both their city and their state and their federal elected officials about being responsible and accountable for these polluting, not only the point sources, but the polluters, and to ensure that these laws, these three basic laws, are upheld and maintained as we try to go forward into a green economy. There are various cleanup efforts that the EPA has instituted. Do you want to speak to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just to clue the listeners in, there are kind of different degrees of severity for some of these toxic cleanup sites. So we
Mhm.
mentioned brownfields, which
Brownfield,
have the
yeah.
potential to be redeveloped, where when we look at Superfunds, really what we're looking to do is contain, and they're
They
not,
have to be capped.
they have to be capped, exactly. So they're really not fit for any type of human interaction, and these are often old manufacturing sites. So
Sure.
the one I know that is cited in the report is it's a wood products factory that closed in Haverford. So just to walk you through kind of the basic cleanup efforts and stages, they're going to be fencing off the contamination site, installing wells to capture contaminated groundwater, and then of course conducting regular sampling to detect any soil and or water contamination. And then in addition to ongoing treatment, some of the wells were installed in immediate vicinity with regular monitoring and detecting testing, so that none of the contaminants can get into, of course, the pressure source of our fresh water, the ground aquifers just below the Earth's crust, to make sure that the soil doesn't receive any contamination. So these, obviously, the Superfund sites do vary greatly in kind of the particular type of contamination that occurs within the former manufacturing site, what have you. But what we're looking at is a significant cut to these. So the initial figure was 30% cut to all of the Superfund program, and that does include within it some of the Office of Environmental Justice functions directly through that, because of the high volume of, I think 62% of all minorities live within 3 miles of Superfund site in the United States.
Wow.
So when you look at kind of the injustices of the adverse effects of these environmental policies, they're certainly disproportionately affecting low-income people and people of color.
You felt that the budget was going to be revised, and it may not go as high as 30%.
Right.
And so you think it might be between 15 and 30%. Of course, we would ask that our listening audience, if they have been moved by this information, to contact write a letter, send an email, make a phone call, go to the office and visit, do all four,
yes,
all
please.
of the above, to their elected representatives at all levels, not just the local state legislature, but also the federal, the U.S. Congress,
Of course.
from whence much of this funding comes, requesting that because the Philadelphia and Camden areas are home to so many brownfield sites and Superfund sites that we should actually be asking for more money, not less.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the exact message we want to send. We cannot afford to lose a single dollar, and even if it is closer to the $150 million figure, which is more like 15%, we want to make sure that we communicate to our. We focus primarily on the federal politicians, but you can call everything down to your state assembly member and ask that they prioritize your health and your economy, your job, your future, by protecting the EPA's budget and saving every penny, that we really need all the money we can get to solve many problems that clearly need to be dealt with, things that are not just our pocketbooks, but also our human health.
The public health risk is very serious here, and we need to be cognizant of it, and do all we can from an electorate side. Our elected officials can only do what we advise them we want them to do.
Yeah, they work for us, right?
Yeah, they work for us.
Exactly.
We elect them. We send them with our tax dollars to the various assemblies, and we need to hold them accountable and make it known to them that these are very serious issues that we need to keep high on our to-do list.
Absolutely. And I think writing and calling is really great, calling when there's a big vote, but also calling to thank politicians that have been particularly supportive and make sure they know that you appreciate them doing so, I think is a really great way to get engaged. And we certainly encourage everybody, if they're on Drexel's campus, to come find us, and we try and make it as easy as humanly possible. We even send you a script that you can read directly off of, make sure you have all the numbers and emails available to you, so we can make our voices heard.
Well, Caroline, on our link page, I'm going to include your link, and I'm also going to include for our listening audience a link that they can download. Anybody who's listening and wants to read this very, very good and comprehensive report. It's called The State of Risk, Pennsylvania, How Hobbling the Environmental Protection Agency Would Threaten Pennsylvanians' Health, Families, Jobs, and Economy. And that was produced by the Vice President, Elizabeth B. Thompson, Vice President, U.S. Climate and Political Affairs of the Earth Justice Defense.
Environmental Defense Fund, yeah.
Environmental Defense Fund. So we'll make that available to our listening audience. Anyone who wants to download it, click on the link.
Awesome.
Caroline, is there anything that you would like to add? Any comments that you would like to bring to our listening audience?
I think, vote. vote. We have primaries coming up, and we are a nonpartisan group. We are not blue or red, we are green, and that means that we are voting for the best candidate on climate regardless of their party affiliation. So this is a great opportunity for us to get really good climate candidates up and down the ballot at every level of government. We have really important midterms coming up, and it's important, like you said, this is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is the only federal agency tasked with holding corporate polluters accountable and making sure that we are protecting our land and water. And I think a really important point too here in Pennsylvania is we had a really big court case coming up, but our state constitution affords each Pennsylvanian the right to clean air and clean water. And I think it is our duty as citizens to ensure that each person living alongside of us has access to clean air and clean water. It is a basic human right, and our politicians should know that it's a priority of ours going into election season, but all the time.
Well, thank you, Carolyn Burkholder, for being our guest speaker this morning. We appreciate your efforts. We appreciate everything that you're doing to make the general public and the students and the general Drexel community more aware of public health risks and threats to our environmental resuresources. We hope to have you back at some point when we begin our series on hydraulic fracturing, commonly known as fracking. And we thank you again for coming to speak with us today.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work you're doing tonight.
Thank you.